of the media coverage has been about the wordplay around new taxes on working people. And the focus has been on the upper end of the tax bracket. But what does it all mean for people struggling to make ends meet?
Joining us now to discuss what's in this budget for those most in need is Katie Schmuecker, Principal Policy Advisor at the Joseph Rowntree Foundation, a charity aimed at solving poverty in the UK. Hi, Katie. Welcome to God Save the UK.
Thanks very much.
We should start by saying there was a shout out for the JRF in the budget.
There was.
Were you aware that was going to happen?
We were not aware that was going to happen. But I have to say that is several budgets in a row where JRF has now had a shout out from the government of the day.
Are you keeping a big tally of them in the office?
Well, I mean, the budget, when it doesn't happen, we will know that we have failed. It feels like a very high bar to maintain now.
Maybe the budget where it doesn't happen means you've won.
I love that. Yes, I'm going with that.
How are you feeling? Sort of gut feelings. We all watched the budget together. What's your gut feelings in the kind of immediate aftermath of watching that speech about what it means for the people that you're working with most?
Well, I mean, every budget is a statement of a government's political priorities. And the Chancellor, early on in her speech, talked about people need to be able to feel change. And we would absolutely wholeheartedly agree with that. And we would argue that the people who most needed to feel change were those who are experiencing hardship right now and those who are at risk of it. You know, we've entering into another winter of cost of living crisis. In the first half of this year, we know from work that we do that there were 7 million low-income households going without essentials. Like, what the budget did for those people is, for us, the sort of test that had to be passed. And there are good things in there.
So let's start with the positives.
Yeah. Okay, great. Let's start with the positives.
Because we get accused mainly by my friend for being always leading with the negative. So let's start with a positive.
Okay, I'm happy to be able to do that because there are some things to be positive about. So the thing that we got a shout out for was a change to deductions policy. This is part of universal credit, where some people's universal credit payments are brought lower by the fact that they are repaying debts of some sort. Often these are debts that have been built up by taking an advance payment whilst waiting for their first universal credit payment, which takes 5 weeks to be made. So that debt gets built up and then clawed back from the basic rate of benefits. Now, the basic rate of benefits, for those who don't know, £91 per week for a single person. That rate is brought lower still by debt deductions. That really drives hardship for millions of families. And so what the Chancellor did is she reduced the maximum deduction from 25% to 15%. That's a good thing. We're pleased to see that. We would have liked her to have gone further and created a legal minimum in the system so that no sort of reduction can bring people's payments down. So think about something like the benefit cap. That also can lead to some people living on very low levels of income. So we would have liked her to have gone further, but certainly the deductions policy is a good change. But we also heard really positive things about the national living wage rate, about social house building, a change to carers allowance and how much carers can work before their benefits begin to be removed. So I think there are things there that are positive, but there are also a couple of skeletons in the closet.
Okay.
Well, on theme for Halloween.
Yeah, on theme for Halloween. So let's talk about those then. What were the skeletons?
The two things that we are concerned about are people who have ill health and disabilities, and private renters on low incomes. So taking each of those in turn. The Chancellor confirmed that the government will not go ahead with the work capability assessment reforms that the previous government announced. So that's reforms to the benefits for people who are deemed by the system to be not expected to work due to their health condition or because they're disabled. She confirmed that they will still make a £3 billion saving over a number of years, but that they will do it in a different way, but has not specified yet what that different way is.
Right.
So that leaves hanging over people a very substantial cut to benefits, potentially, for people who are sick and disabled. Now, we don't know what that looks like. The government has certainly talked about wanting to support people to move into employment. That would be a really positive way of bringing down the benefits bill, because if you're working, then you're paying out less in benefits. But achieving that level of savings over such a short period of time, we are very unclear quite what that's going to look like. And I think the question we would ask the government is, how are they going to do that without driving up hardship for disabled people? Because if you look at the work that we do, disabled people are one of the groups who are most likely to be experiencing hardship. Half of all households in poverty have got a disabled family member. 2/3 of people who experienced destitution in the UK are disabled or have a long-term health condition. So if you are disabled, if you are unwell, you are much more likely to be experiencing hardship. How is the government going to deliver that level of savings without further driving up that hardship?
So that's something we need much more detail and very quickly, presumably. Talk to me about private renters. What's the concern there?
That one is in a way simpler in the sense that the previous government froze something called local housing allowance. That is housing benefit that goes to private renters. It covers the bottom 30% of rents in a market. The previous government froze that for the foreseeable. This government has not changed that. So that means as we head into next year, the amount of support that people get for their private rents is now dislocated from the reality of rents in their local area. We're arguing in the run-up to the budget that local housing allowance needs to be permanently linked to local rents so that people can be sure that they can keep a roof over their head. You know, we have a huge problem with homelessness in this country. You know, over 100,000 children living in temporary accommodation. People not being able to afford their rent is a really key part of that. The government's done some good things on announcing money for social house building. They've done some good things with the Renters' Rights Bill that is going through Parliament. But there are still loopholes in that bill. And now we see that people, again, will see their support for their housing payments dislocated from the realities of what it costs them to pay for their rent. And that just means, again, further hardship as people have to juggle their budgets to try to cover the rent, to keep a roof over their heads, whilst also trying to put food on the table and keep their homes warm this winter.
That problem of keeping things the same, but fundamentally society's getting more expensive and the climate is getting worse, that amounts to a real terms cut. Has there been other examples of that?
Well, I mean, we certainly see that we're still not yet caught up in terms of the value, the real terms value of benefits. So the government confirmed that it will uprate benefits by 1.7%. That is the inflation rate from September, which is the standard way of doing that. However, in the budget today, it was confirmed that average inflation for this year is going to be 2.5%. So benefits a little bit behind the average rate of inflation for this year. But I think you have to think about the context that comes on top of, which is several years where the cost of essentials like energy and food, the things that you can't not have really driven high inflation, have really skyrocketed. That has hit low-income families the hardest. And, you know, that is why we see long queues at food banks. It's why we hear stories about people living on one meal a day so that their kids can eat better. These are the things that we hear from people all the time in the work that we do. You know, recently we're talking to a group of people with experience of poverty who were telling us that they've cancelled Christmas this year again because they just simply cannot afford it. And so there is still this kind of gulf for people, even though the overall inflation is better and some things are improving. Hardship is still being very much experienced now. And people can't just be told to wait for growth tomorrow for things to improve.
As somebody who can't drive and has spent most of their life on trains and buses, I'm always interested to hear what public transport announcements they have made. There's some positive sounding announcements in terms of trains in the north of England, particularly around sort of York and Huddersfield and Manchester, which is very useful. As anyone who's tried to travel across the country knows, it is essentially the sort of quest to dump the ring in Mount Doom. Like it's
As
very
someone
difficult.
who lives near Huddersfield, I feel that pain on a very personal level.
So that's positive, but the ditching of the £2 cap on bus fares, which is going to rise to £3 at the end of this year, which was implemented by the last government but has not been reversed. Rachel Reeves announced it won't be reversed in the budget. That's gone down particularly badly with a lot of groups, especially if you travel to and from work by bus every day. It's an extra £10 a week or £520 a year. Given that there was also an announcement of a freeze in fuel duty, feels like from a climate perspective, that's not necessarily where you want to be encouraging people, but also from a kind of perspective of the Joseph Rowntree Foundation, is that another example of working people paying a price that they shouldn't be paying?
Buses are the mode of transport that are used most by low-income people. So, you know, that is a big increase from £2 to £3 as a sort of proportion. That's huge. People will feel that in their day-to-day budgets. If you're struggling to heat your home this winter, if you're struggling to put food on the table already, having to find an extra tenner a week just to get to and from work, and that's before you've even done anything else in your life, like go to the supermarket or anything like that, that all adds to the pressure that households are feeling this winter. Or actually not this winter, it'll be coming in from April.
Yeah.
Okay, Katie, well, give us your review, your final overview of Rachel Reeves' very first budget. We have introduced a new measure. It's called pumpkins out of 5. Pumpkins are good. So just for clarity, more pumpkins are good.
Yeah.
So what do you think? Out of 5? Marks out of 5?
I think I would give it a 3 out of 5.
Okay, interesting.
So there are some measures where we really needed to see progress, like social house building, like some relief for people who are subject to deductions in universal credit, the extension of the household support fund, also very welcome. But those two kind of looming cuts, one for private renters and one for people who are in ill health or disabled, are really concerning.
Katie, thank you so much for joining us on Pod Save the UK.
Thanks for having me.